So I suppose we are a little bit on a different track than I said we would be on when we started out. So we did obviously just take a break. I think that we will, and we do have a very hard stop. So we're going to go a little bit more efficiently through the rest of our meeting. Thank you very much, Professor Auerbach from UMass Boston, Emerita, and Jewish Voice for Peace, Amelia Diamond, LSCW educator, board member, Boston Workers Circle, Mary Najimy, elementary STEM lab teacher in Concord, Sana Fadel, from SAWA, Newton Area Alliance for Peace and Justice, and public school parent. Did I get that right? All right, well, thank you so much for coming. As I said, we do have a significant time constraint, and we are going to get shut down in not too long, and we have one more speaker. So we're going to try to stick to what we originally said in our emails with you. Thank you so much for your preparation for 10 minutes of opening remarks. Then you're going to get the commissioner questions. As you've seen, we have a hot bench occasionally or always, and the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to start. I'm grateful for the work that this commission is doing as we face what is arguably the most dangerous period of our lifetimes with the rise of white supremacists who are attacking the rights of immigrants, trans people, Jews, Muslims, Palestinians, and more. And our best hope in the face of these attacks is standing together. I do want to make a couple of observations based on what has just transpired here in this hearing. The first is, while the commission is rightly concerned with presenting multiple perspectives, the most vocal people on the commission seem to feel that only one perspective is acceptable. The second thing that I'm struck by is the fact that no one on the commission seems to be worried about the single greatest threat to Jews, namely white supremacist anti-Semitism. No one has mentioned white supremacist anti-Semitism. There are three aspects to my identity that I bring to my testimony today. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm the daughter of Holocaust refugees, and I'm a retired teacher educator. I'm a member of JVP and an anti-Zionist because I am the daughter of Holocaust survivors. The Shoah is baked into my DNA, and that's why I call for Palestinian liberation. JVP has 20,000 supporters in Massachusetts, spanning 285 zip codes, with members in 41 Senate districts and 140 state legislative districts. We are fully committed to fighting anti-Semitism and envision a world where all people can live in peace as equals, where the safety of one group does not come at the expense of the safety of another group. Like many Jews, I oppose all forms of religious or ethnic supremacy. That means I don't believe that the U.S. should be a Christian nationalist state. I don't believe that India should be a Hindu state, and I don't believe that that Israel should be a state that privileges Jews over Palestinians. Opposing Jewish nationalism does not mean I'm anti-Semitic any more than opposing Christian nationalism means I'm anti-Christian. It's critically important for students to be able to grapple with these same distinctions in the classroom. This brings me to my identity as a daughter of Holocaust refugees. I'm named after my grandmother, Elsa Warburg, who, like my parents, fled Hitler's Germany. You may know the Warburgs as prominent Jewish bankers, scholars, and lawyers. What you may not know is that most of the Warburgs were anti-Zionist, or at least not Zionists. They argued among themselves about this. It was not an argument about religion. It was an ideological argument about whether or not Jews needed a homeland to ensure Jewish safety. In fact, Jews have argued about Zionism since Zionism was first developed. This kind of debate and contestation are as Max said, core Jewish values. You may know the joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So when I hear the proclamation that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, spoken as though it were a truism, I understand it to be entirely ahistoric and a complete distortion. Moreover, it casts some Jews as good Jews and other Jews as bad Jews based on their support for Israel, comparing apples, a religion, to oranges, a country. I worry that shutting down examination of differences like these will endanger our democratic classrooms. I worry that teachers will be penalized if they show maps of Palestine like the one that you just saw, or they share the fact that more than 38,000 Palestinian children in Gaza are now orphans, or if they introduce current cases before the International Court of Justice. Censoring this kind of information is an attack on democratic education. Finally, I want to bring my identity as a teacher-educator to this conversation. As any educator knows, the most important thing a teacher can do is to teach students how to think for themselves, to investigate, and to analyze. You heard this from the teacher who spoke a few minutes ago. That means asking questions like, who benefits from this narrative? Who is harmed by it? Whose perspectives are excluded in this story? Can these claims be verified? Even grade schoolers can grapple with questions like this. And here's what I want to really come to as my main point with you. In my view, these are the questions that you as commissioners should be asking. When you hear someone say, as if it is a fact, that accusing Israel of genocide is a blood libel, or when the ADL cites statistics premised on a disputed definition of anti-Semitism, it is incumbent on you to question the assumptions about anti-Semitism they're based on, not to accept them as facts. I wish that you, as commissioners, had interrogated the ADL with as much zeal and vigor as you interrogated Max. I'm not asking the commission to agree with my views on genocide or Zionism. What I'm saying is that it is not up to the state to adjudicate debates that have raged within the Jewish community for more than 100 years. It is not up to the commission to declare that some Jews are good Jews and other Jews are bad Jews, or that some Jewish beliefs should be penalized and others should be privileged. In this audience today, there are many Jews and non-Jews who strongly believe that it is not anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist. It is not anti-Semitic to call what's happening in Gaza genocide. It is your responsibility in this commission to ensure that teachers have the space to teach students how to ask good questions and understand multiple perspectives. It is the responsibility of this commission to focus its energy on the very real threat to all of us posed by white supremacy. If the commission goes the route of privileging an Israel-centered approach to fighting anti-Semitism, it runs the risk of being seen as a partisan political tool and losing all legitimacy. At this dangerous moment in history, it is the commission's urgent task to ensure that critical inquiry is the core of our pedagogy.
Thank you. Ms. Najimy?
After that McCarthy-esque inquisition, I don't think it's fair just to say you have 10 minutes, because I have much more than 10 minutes to say to that. As an Arab American educator, I bring to my teaching my own experience with racism, that very racism that I just experienced here. My watch went off telling me my heart rate was elevated to 122. That is a physical manifestation of racism. And I will tell you, Representative, how Hannah would be treated if she went to Gaza. She would be welcomed with open arms. Her family would be brought to the kitchen table and served coffee. And the children and Hannah would run out into the streets and play, even in the rubble now. because the presumption behind that question is anti-Palestinian racism, that all Palestinians are inherently anti-Semitic, inherently violent, inherently anti-democratic, and inherently terrorist supporting. And whether that was your intention or not, that was the impact of that question. The cherry picking. Would you like me to read you the rest of the resources that you didn't say? Those brave educators that came to you who called me Arab filth. How does that sit with you? So now let me get on to my testimony. The racism I have experienced informs my pedagogy. I have become an anti-racist educator over 35 years of teaching. And anti-Semitism is real, and it is rooted in white supremacy, and it is on the march, and here's what it looks like. Swastikas in schools. Racial taunting of sports teams by other sports teams. Setting fires to synagogues. The replacement theory. Elon Musk's inarguable Nazi salute and his speech at the AfD in Germany. But here's what it isn't. It isn't Palestinians expressing their aspirations of freedom, equal rights, and dignity. It isn't people standing in solidarity with Palestinians or criticizing the state of Israel and the system of Zionism. And it is not naming what the international court calls plausible genocide. Conflating the two, as some of these organizations here have done, is anti-Palestinian racism. It erases Palestinian people and their identity and their connection to the land. It denies the Nakba. It dehumanizes Palestinians, justifying killing. And it defames them, as I said before, inherently anti-Semitic, anti-terror, terrorist sympathizing, anti-democratic. And not only does it defame them as that, but anybody who stands in solidarity with them. And that is certainly not how we're going to fight anti-Semitism. The well-orchestrated attacks on the MTA by the ADL and the JCRC and the AJC and the likes and camera is not a way to fight anti-Semitism. In fact, what it's provoking is violence against other members. Death threats, rape threats, doxing. This idea of balance and perspective. There is no shortage of narrative in this country on what some Israelis and some Jewish Americans think about the history of Palestine. What the MTA provides is the counterbalance. So silencing discourse on Israel and Palestine is only leading to a deeper a distrust and an anger at the organizations that are doing it. That keeps no one safe. So here's what we need to do instead. And here's where my 35 years of being an anti-racist educator teaching elementary school comes in. We teach anti-Semitism as one of the many forms of systematic oppression. We help students develop critical thinking by interrogating history and giving them a context. We follow DESE's guidelines of history and social science principles and use the Stop Bullying government resources that talk about how to talk about bullying. We integrate humanizing stories as early as preschool, where children can see the similarities and the humanity amongst different identities. We introduce stereotypes and stereotype busting and explore social issues by mid-elementary school. We study conflicts in middle school and high school by providing that historical context, examining primary sources, multiple narratives, deliberating and debating to help kids make informed decisions. We engage students in looking at their own identity and social positions, getting them to consider how their relationship to the subject influences how they understand the subject and how they've come to think about the other, and where they get their information from, and how it shapes their preconceived notions. We approach situations that do arise with inquiry and empathy, making space for hard conversations. We have to take the lead of Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan, who walked through the encampments daily and wrote in an op-ed in the New York Times, I made clear that if any Jewish student felt harassed, I would intervene. I also said that I can ensure their ability to pursue their education, but that I could not protect them from being offended. We need to understand the difference between being offended and being unsafe. And finally, we create affinity spaces and have trusted adults available to help all students process events in the world that impact their lives and to help them distinguish between comfort and safety. And I'm happy to get into the details of what those things could look like in the classroom.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're out of seating order. Thank you so much. I come to this conversation with a little bit of a different lens. I'm not a public school educator. I'm a 15-plus year Jewish educator on a lot of things, including social justice and anti-Semitism. I'm also the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, a social worker trained in trauma-informed care, and I am a proud product of the Massachusetts school system. So I think well done. My ancestors, my teachers, my rabbis taught me about Machlochet M'Shem Shemayim, argument for the sake of heaven. There are Jews in this room, there are Jews on this panel, some of whom I know pretty well, who I've sat with in coffee shops and argued about this kind of stuff with. There are Jews in this room. There are Jews on this panel with whom I don't agree with fully, and we sit here together because we care deeply about this issue. And the bottom line is my ancestors, my teachers, my rabbis have all taught me that fighting anti-Semitism is not just about protecting Jews. It's about fighting the systems that enable it, the fear that fuels it, and the divisions that keep us from building real safety for all people. Anti-Semitism is real and it's unique. And as an educator, I teach that anti-Semitism is a real and ongoing threat across political lines. But I also see how it's too often used as a weapon to divide Jewish communities from our natural allies, to silence dissent and criticism, and to push a scarcity mindset that isolates us rather than building solidarity. Anti-Semitism education is not a zero-sum game. And when we teach that anti-Semitism is interconnected with other forms of oppression, we deepen our collective understanding and strengthen all movements for justice. What I've found in 15 plus years of teaching this framing, teenagers, which is generally who I teach with, teenagers and up, middle school and up maybe, they come back to me with stories of stronger relationships with their non-Jewish peers in their schools. They've been able to explain when anti-Semitism has shown up to their administrators, and they feel supported by the learning we've done together to do so. My grandparents' survival was about resistance, and it was about relationships. One thing I carry from my family's history is that Jewish survival has never just been about Jews. My grandparents, Maurice and Helene of blessed memory, weren't saved by Jewish exceptionalism. They were saved by those who resisted, by those who refused to comply with unjust laws, by those who saw their struggle as interconnected with others. And they were resettled by Hias, God willing, that stays around under this administration. They came to this country and they joined the ILGWU garment workers and the typographers unions. They were active in movements for justice. They participated in democracy because they knew what it meant to experience hate firsthand. Their memories are motivators for me, and their hands are at my backs today. We need an expansive framework, not a narrow one. I agree with you. We need an expansive framework. And when I talk about anti-Semitism, I ask my students, are we talking about it as part of a broader struggle against white supremacy, authoritarianism, and all forms of oppression? And that's what I want this commission to consider as part of this important task. It does not exist in a vacuum. If we only fight for ourselves as Jews, and this is me talking to the Jews on the panel, the Jews who are listening to this, I don't know, I'm speaking to that. We have to think about how it interacts with Islamophobia, anti-Black racism, anti-Palestinian racism, transphobia, and all forms of hate, because they are used as a tool in part of a larger fight. Some of the ways this might manifest in policies and ways that you can have an impact in the state of Massachusetts: rapid incident responses, Calling attention to and increasing awareness about hate violence is one of the most important things you can do. Data and reporting. Marginalized communities feel safest reporting incidents to community-based organizations, not to state agencies and not to law enforcement. So figuring out funding for this, software, training, and hotlines so that communities can actually report and then make determinations about what they want done with that information. Community education. A lot of incidents happen with bystanders and upstanders there. What is the intervention training that can happen? Intercommunal collaboration. Finding ways to fund religious communities working together on things like food distribution and other work that way, so that there are pro-social activity that builds trust. Restorative justice programs for minors in ways that, for anything that does not qualify as a hate crime, creating restorative justice programs in schools that allow young people to work through collaboratively. These are the kinds of things, yes, I know you're working on curriculum, but these are programs and these are things that are proven to work as preventative measures, not proactive, not reactive measures. I hope this commission considers all of our testimony here today as a charge to include diverse voices, because I did hear a lot of concern about diversity in the earlier conversation. But I am concerned that that diversity feels like you're concerned about one side of it. And I want you to approach this crucial issue from a solidarity framework and to consider how to encourage critical thinking and inquiry-based frameworks amongst the student body. And when I bring that solidarity framework to my students, I have found them and their parents grateful for the nuanced conversations they have, the ability to turn questions over, and to understand complicated ideas like this in an opening and fruitful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Cataldo, Chair Vilas, and members of the commission. My name is Sana Fadl. I'm a public school parent from Newton. And my testimony will focus on 3 topics. The first is weaponizing the IRA definition in Title VI claims. The second is censorship in curricula. And third are the political goals of the silencing and censoring we have been talking about. The recommendations of the Biden's national strategy to counter anti-Semitism rests on defining anti-Semitism, strongly favoring the IRA definition. This definition, which we unequivocally oppose, whether adopted formally or used informally, expands the definition of anti-Semitism to include not only incidents of hate and discrimination against Jewish people, but also certain criticism of the State of Israel. Limiting the applicability of civil rights laws based on one's political views on a foreign government is extremely troubling. A new category of, quote, anti-Israel bias or hate is being used to threaten basic tenets of a democratic society. First, our right to criticize, protest, and advocate to influence our own government's policies and actions. And second, our children's right to a robust education that prepares them to be critical thinkers to fully participate in our democracy. So Massachusetts laws do not regulate any other form of hate or racism, incorporating attitudes towards a foreign government or a political ideology. Nor do our policies or laws seek to erase and criminalize an entire peoples, namely Palestinians. That would be no different than claiming that hostility towards Iran and Afghanistan is Islamophobic, or being pro-Russian is anti-Ukrainian or otherwise, as a form of hate. But instead, imposing that view on discipline, curriculum, and professional development is what we're hearing today. The formal adoption of, again, quote, anti-Israel bias in our state's policies and administration would lay the groundwork for 1, silencing and disciplining of students and teachers, 2, control of schools' curricula through censorship and book banning, and 3, inflating and distorting data on anti-Semitism in schools. This may make the classroom more comfortable for some students by avoiding difficult discussions about Israel and Palestine in the classroom, but adopting those recommendations does not make Jewish students safe. We oppose using allegations of a hostile learning environment to advocate for the erasure and criminalization of Palestinian history, culture, or humanity. This conflation of being safe and feeling safe is reminiscent of the anti-equity arguments that discussing systems of oppression and supremacy and its legacy makes individual students uncomfortable. This argument assumes students are incapable of understanding systemic oppression as opposed to individual biases. Similarly, a definition of anti-Semitism that is deeply intertwined with creating a new category of rights, again, anti-Israel, leaves no space for students and parents, Jewish or otherwise, who do not adhere to this ideology. Teachers have been accused of promoting a hostile learning environment when sharing balanced classroom materials which include Palestinian perspectives, or if students share or even acknowledge empathy and identification with Palestinians. I'm going to share some examples from public schools that I've heard from. One example, students spoke sympathizing with Palestinians and called for peace. Another Palestinian student, first student was not Palestinian. This student, a Palestinian student, was about to speak at an event, and before even speaking, because of his Palestinian heritage, he was asked to there was a campaign to censor him. Anyone who called for a ceasefire before the Biden-Harris administration called for a ceasefire was called anti-Semitic. Fabricated accusations against an educator to build a case for parental review of all curricular material related to Israel and Palestine. Schools that issued a statement expressing concern for Israelis, including concern for Palestinians in the same sentence. A school that included Palestinian narratives in its curriculum. A school worksheet referencing historic Palestine before 1948. The scapegoating of the MTA is also an example. These are all examples. I'm happy to go into any of them if you need. The underlying theme in all of these examples is a mere accusation was all that was necessary to append a student or teacher's life with the bigger goal of influencing the staffing and curricula in a school district. You too will hear these stories, but they will be presented to you as examples of anti-Semitism, and it is your job to get into the facts and motivations behind those stories. It is not anti-Semitic for Palestinians to speak openly about their own experiences. And to suggest as much serves to only silence Palestinian voices and heighten anti-Palestinian racism. So campaigns to control the curricula and censor it, and censor of books are not new to Massachusetts schools. We've seen it in my school district. But the commission must not appease calls to control educational materials that do not center and support Israel. The distortion and the misrepresentation of Palestinians' culture and history and their political aspirations as anti-Semitic dangerously diverts attention away from acts of hate targeting Jewish people and institutions. There's also a long-standing campaign to censor Massachusetts' own history and social studies frameworks. This summer, Camera, a right-wing Israeli advocacy organization, summarized their approach. And I quote, "Teaching about Palestine really means teaching anti-Israel bias and propaganda." That was the entire argument. Both the AJC and the JSCRC blasted ethnic studies curricula in public schools, marrying right-wing attacks on the same ethnic studies curricula that address colonial histories in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, or even arguments that teaching about slavery makes white students unsafe. This extends systemically by calls to censor history and social studies curricula that present Palestinian perspectives alongside Israeli perspectives. 2 months ago, a federal appeals court ruled that a curriculum that merely makes people feel uncomfortable is not discriminatory, nor does the inclusion of anti-Zionist material preclude students from exercising their religion. Happy to quote that ruling if you need. As a parent, I want my children to be challenged. I am grateful to every teacher who has used their position to protect our children's right to learn. It is appalling to me to see educators treated and smeared as the enemy. I also stand behind my educators' unions because our teachers cannot do this alone. My children need the union to have our educators' backs so that they can have our children's backs. And I'm going to end with 2 quotes. The first is from Vice President Vance, who echoed President Nixon. "The professors are the enemy." And I'm going to quote a response from Professor Jason Stanley, author of Erasing History. "The leaders of the movement to attack universities and schools are all Ivy League grads. These guys are sending their kids to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. They're attacking the educational institutions and the universities because the universities provide critical inquiry into the kinds of myths that's required for these kinds of politics. This kind of politics elevates the dominant group. Erasing history paves the way for ethnic, racial, and religious nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much.